Hello and welcome back to the latest episode of the Big 12 Huddle. As usually here, I'm your host, Calvin Glenn Alexander, host of the CGA Tour. And I'm joined tonight by Bob Trollsby and Roger Phipps of the, Roger, I'll let you go and say your podcast name first, then go to Bob.
The Knighted Ones.
There we go.
Yeah, Bob Trollsby here from the Cocaine Willie podcast representing Kansas State.
You know, I got to say, I got to update it. You know, I mean, Cocaine Pete, Meth Pete, you know, I saw your tweet earlier at me, you know, I mean, there's definitely a little bit like something going on, and Oklahoma's more known for meth than cocaine if we're going into the illegal substances factor. But, you know, I mean, you know, it just is. I saw somebody tweet back. It was like Meth Pete, and it's like a famous, big, or not famous, but an older Big 12 logo that has where Pete's eyes are definitely like he's in the middle of dead week and 6 Red Bulls in. I'll say it that way. So, anyways, with that being said, here we got a list of topics for tonight's podcast. We're going to go over the best transfer that we think is going on in the Big 12 for football. Say our goodbyes to the Pac-12 and also to the Longhorn Network, but to the Pac-12 Network as well too. And then the All-American slate here. Talk about that a little bit, as I think I'm right in saying this. K-State and Utah do not have a preseason All-American first team, but they are favored to win the conference overall, and talk about that a little bit as well. So just go ahead and hop into it. First thing that I, of course, want to talk about here is it's the best transfer in. Roger, I know you and I have talked a lot about, you know, Big 12 going back and forth here and the preseason and everything, but who do you think here is the best transfer kind of coming in for the Big 12 this season?
All right, so I'm gonna preface this and kind of qualify it. So there's who's going to make the most impact and who the best actual transfer is from a skill set standpoint. You guys know that I'm high on KJ Jefferson. I think he's got a lot of opportunity here that he was missing in Arkansas, specific with the line. And I think he's got a real good opportunity there as well. Penny Boone will be interesting to see. And obviously I'm starting with the UCF guys. We've got 2 on this list that we're looking at from Heartland College Sports. And Penny Boone is interesting because he's another 1,400 yard back, All-American. Offensive player of the year. He was ranked 8th nationally. So there's a lot there. He has a lot of opportunity, but what I think is going to hurt him is the number of carries that he's going to get, because he's not going to be the feature back. He's going to have to share carries. So I'm going to ask you this, Cal. Are we looking at this from an impact perspective or just a pure player?
I want to say impact perspective, because the next guy on the list here that I want to ask about is Dylan Edwards coming into K-State from Colorado, right? And that's one of those guys where the former Colorado running back who was off a 4-win team, like what are we seeing here from a Colorado transfer in?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, and you know, obviously Mr. Willie here will have a better insight into this, but the big thing with him that I think he may have some trouble with is he's 5'9", 170 pounds. So that's more like a scat pack type of running back.
Deuce Vaughn a little Deuce Vaughn action. Yeah.
So it's going to be interesting for me as to whether, you know, he's a running back, but is he going to be used more kind of like what UCF used our scat backs? And so for me, I don't know, that's a little concern for me in the Big 12 with the lines that we have.
Yeah, to be honest with you, I'm not really worried about Dylan Edwards. I think he's a great transfer pickup. Colorado didn't really utilize him the way that a guy like Dylan Edwards needs to be utilized. You need to your point, scat back is a great comparison, but I think, you know, a lot of the ways that we leveraged Deuce Vaughn back when we had him are going to be ways that we need to leverage Dylan Edwards as well. And we already have a top 5 guy when it comes to all-purpose yards in DJ Giddens, who's coming back to the Big 12 and coming back to K-State for what will probably be his last year, because he's probably going to be an NFL draft pick after this season. So you're going to have a lot more creative ways where you're going to need to leverage Dylan Edwards, probably in some more passing types of situations. And the thing that maybe other Big 12 fans aren't aware of is Dylan Edwards has played football with Avery Johnson for years. He played against him in high school, and I would definitely recommend looking it up. But Mays, Kansas played Derby, Kansas in the state championship when they were seniors. and they put up like 50 points each. It was the Avery Johnson and Dylan Edwards show in that game. But they played like Pee Wee football together. They played football together for years prior to this. They already have some chemistry. Avery hosted him on his visit when he came and did his official visit after coming in from the transfer portal. So you don't have to worry about chemistry being a thing. Maybe that wasn't the case with Dylan and Shedeur. Maybe they didn't have a whole lot of chemistry. They don't go back a whole long ways. So I'm super stoked about Dylan. I think he's going to do a great job. And when we look at the K-State offensive line, we're not returning a ton of starters from last season, but we're returning a ton of depth pieces from last season. And the way that K-State has approached things with the offensive line and the way that Connor Riley has approached the development of offensive linemen is we recruit guys that have huge, high upside, dudes with like 6'4" plus frames and who can put on weight. And you think back at like Felix Anudike Uzama when he first got picked up by K-State, obviously on the defensive side, he's a guy that Connor Riley recruited and looked at and he's like, you're 150 pounds soaking wet, but we can do something with this frame. That's the same type of approach they've taken with the offensive line, is identifying high upside guys. And they did it with 2-star, 3-star guys for the first couple of years. He's now getting 3-star, 4-star talent in the offensive line, picking these guys up from high school, and they don't leave the program. They stay with the program. They develop, and by the time they reach their junior season, they're ready to start. And once the Cooper Beebes of the world, the Hayden Gillums of the world leave the program, you've got Carver Willis, who may end up playing on Sundays someday. You've got Easton Kilty, who we actually picked up out of the transfer portal. And he's listed on the honorable mention of the article that you had shared prior to us talking today. But Easton Kilty was a top 3, top 4 offensive lineman in the portal back in the winter when it first opened up right after the season ended. So Kilty's going to be coming in. He's an experienced guy who played at the FCS level, but did so in the Missouri Valley Conference, which we all know is an elite conference when it comes to football at the FCS level. So I feel really good about our offensive line, knowing that we've got these guys who have developed behind a great offensive line group that graduated last year, but they're not going to show up on some of these All-American lists. They're not going to show up on some of these preseason lists because they weren't the starters last year. But I have the confidence of knowing what this coaching staff has done for 5-6 seasons now is what they're going to continue to do with a better talent than they started out with when Kleiman first set foot on K-State's campus to recruit the group that just graduated, really.
Yeah, the one guy from the list that is also an honorable mention that I think is going to just catch people by surprise a little bit is Jaden Bray going to West Virginia from Oklahoma State. Of course, being an Oklahoma State guy, I saw him and I just thought, man, if he could only get the ball more often, if he had a little bit more chemistry going with the quarterbacks and yeah, he got dinged up a little bit, but Oklahoma State's receiving core last year was just really going through it. I mean, Brennan Presley, Rashad Owens, great players overall, but you're talking about Brennan Presley, who's kind of that scat back type size guy who just plays wide receiver and plays slot. And then you're also talking about Rashad Owens, who's played every position, it seems like, on the receiving end for Oklahoma State. He's played tight end, wide receiver, all that type of stuff. And so those guys being on the roster and having some continuity with, granted a brand new quarterback last year, Alan Bowman, left it where Jaden Bray was trying to fit in, sideways. And there's enough other Oklahoma State wide receivers where it's like, okay, how's he going to fit in? And now he's going to be the wide receiver 1, it looks like, for the Mountaineers, which I think that's a guy as also we should just kind of keep track of, like, all right, West Virginia, do they have a passing game? Who's going to be their guy? And Jaden Bray, he's the guy who's going to go up and make those just jump catches in the air, those 50-50 balls, and bring him in. And he's one of the guys where I'm like, crap, can't believe he left, in the portal. Are there guys for you guys who maybe didn't even transfer into another Big 12 team, or I hope they didn't at least, you guys go, you know what, crap, can't believe that we lost them out of our team here?
Yeah, I mean, from UCF standpoint, there really wasn't any huge losses, meaning people out of the starting rotation or anything like that. We do a pretty good job with our NIL budget and keeping our players, and that's a priority. There was DeMarcus Bowman who transferred out. He was a 5-star running back that we had on the roster, but he didn't, I don't think he was willing to wait. We've got a stable of running backs. Our skill players being in Florida is usually really, really, really deep. And so that was the big one. Everybody else, it was more about for us in the transfer portal this year was more about the defensive transformation. That's really where we still needed some time to get up to speed at a Big 12 level for depth. That's the biggest thing for G5 teams to P5 teams, I think, is just the depth aspect of it. A lot of G5 teams have a lot of great players. I mean, 3 of the players that we talked about already are coming from G5 teams, right? So, and in your case, Bob, you mentioned an FCS guy. So, I think it's just that depth aspect. So for us, I mean, who we picked up is more important. Cedric Hawkins, Traquan Fegans, USC, Ohio State transfers. I think it's, I think it's more along those lines. I do want to go back on impact players that you mentioned. Someone that we haven't talked about, Dorian Singer, who came from USC and went to Utah. I think Utah had a quarterback problem last year because of injuries, right? And so now they've got their star quarterback back. Utah's gearing up, I feel like, to contend. I'm really looking forward to that Black Friday game for us at the end of the year because, there's a lot of buzz around whether this has Big 12 championship implications. And I think Dorian Singer is going to get a lot of run in that Utah offense now that they've got their gunslinger back. And I think he's going to be an impact player. 1,100-yard receiver last year at USC. And I think he's going to get some run at Utah. So I'd love to get you guys' thoughts on that. Obviously, quarterback position is one of the most impactful positions you're going to have. The guy who transferred, I can't remember his name. There was only one other quarterback that we were kind of looking at. Dequan Finn. He was actually, before we got KJ, we were flirting with him for a little while too. And I think he's a good, he got on campus. He was interested in signing, but we got KJ. So we kind of went with KJ Jefferson, but, he's a good quarterback, but it's going to be interesting to see how he goes from Toledo and transitions his game to the P5. I think there's some red flags when you're talking about those positions.
I'm curious. I mean, it's a bummer that you're not going to get to play Baylor this season because I think a Penny Boone, Daquan Finn, get those two guys back together since they're both coming from Toledo, right? I think that.
Well, that and pay them back for last year's complete collapse in the fourth quarter. I'm still bitter about that. I don't know what we were doing.
Yeah, that was an interesting game. Yeah, when I look at the rest of this list of transfers into the Big 12, and when I think about, I guess your original question, Cal, was guys that have left. Will Howard was really the biggest loss that we faced at K-State, at least. And, Roger, you mentioned it. Quarterback is an incredibly big position where if you lose your quarterback, you need to have a backup plan because if you don't, then you're kind of screwed. Fortunately, we at least had a backup plan with Avery Johnson, who was kind of always the backup plan. And he was always going to be the starter at K-State at some point, whether it was a matter of when, not if. So he's off at Ohio State, whatever. I hope he has a great season, and I hope that we have Avery Johnson and Will Howard on a Heisman stage later this year. We'll see. But when I think about impact transfers into the conference, obviously KJ Jefferson's probably the biggest top of mind guy for me because, to your point, like you mentioned before, Arkansas was on life support most of the season last year. And if he can do what he had done prior to last season and replicate that in a system that makes sense for him and with some better talent around him and a better system with better coaching, I think that's going to be an incredible situation for KJ. UCF is probably my dark horse. When I look at dark horses for the Big 12 this year, UCF is probably top on that list for me. So I'm excited to see what he can do there. And I'm excited for K-State's matchup with UCF. If that, happens in Arlington, I would love to see that happen. And yeah, when I think about,
so would I.
Yeah. And when I think about other,
sorry, Cal.
I just have to, because of the USF connection. I know UCF fans are huge fans of USF. Old friend.
We don't call them that. We call them the Cows.
Old conference friend Gary Bohannon is now at BYU, which I don't even know if he's going to be starting there based on some of the talk I've heard from BYU fans. So that's another one I'm going to be fascinated to see how that quarterback battle plays out between him and I don't know the name of the guy who's projected to be the starter at BYU if it's not him, but I think it's going to be a fascinating.
Well, that's his third transfer, I think, too, yes. Right?
Yeah,
he transferred into. Yeah, and he was supposed to be. They had another. Actually, our backup last year transferred to us because Bohannon transferred to the Cows. Timmy McClain, because Timmy McClain was a big high school recruit that came out of Central Florida. We went another direction. He wanted to come to UCF because he was there in Stanford. And there was a lot of noise amongst UCF fans about that because we've got kind of a pipeline to Stanford, and Stanford's a pretty big, or was it Oviedo? I can't remember. Oviedo or high school. But either way, both of those high schools are pretty big within the recruiting game locally. So he went there and then he came back. He ended up playing like 3 out of our games last season because John Rice Plumlee was hurt literally from when we played the Boise game on. And the big thing I think that's different for KJ Jefferson is he gives us the ability to stretch the field in a way that John Rice didn't. His weaponry was more about being able to be almost like a triple option extra running back on the field, whereas KJ's more of a pocket passer who'll run it if he needs to. And that really hurt us in the red zone, believe it or not. So we had the number 21, I think, offensively, in the country, but our scoring offense and our red zone offense sputtered, and we lost a lot of tight games by 3 points or less last year, 3 games. So, I think he gives us a little bit more. He's got a bigger frame. He's a taller guy. He can throw the ball down the field, and he still has that ability to run. I think instinctually his ability to climb the ladder instead of just relying on his feet will open up some doors for us, especially with the 1-2 punch, 1-2-3. Honestly, we've got Miles Montgomery from Cincinnati as well, along with RJ Harvey. So I really think he has the ability to make the biggest difference because he can sling the ball and climb the pocket. And I think he'll be more durable than what John Rice Plumlee was last year.
Well, I also just want to ask, Bob here, of course, too, about the final, I guess, K-State transfer that I want to talk about here, which is Dante Cephas, unless we talked about him and I totally missed it, but I don't think we did. I mean, talk about like a star-studded backfield. You guys got 2 running back transfers in. How do you feel about him? I mean, I know he's wide receiver here at the end of the day, but how do you feel about him on the team, I guess?
We needed more depth at the wide receiver position because we did lose RJ Garcia, his snap count had kind of gone down towards the end of the season last year, but it's depth, right? You're missing out on that depth. Dante Cephas, I mean, and Keegan Johnson was another guy. We had brought him in last year from Iowa, and he was playing in, Brian Ferentz's offense at Iowa, decided he wanted to come somewhere where maybe he could get some offensive yardage outside of just ground and pound. And I don't even know. Brian Ferentz isn't the OC at Iowa anymore. So I think he made a good decision either way, but he was injured most of the year last year. So you've got a guy who's got a lot of talent potential in Keegan Johnson, who's returning for K-State. And then you've got Dante Cephas, who when he was also not in an anemic offensive situation last year like he was at Penn State, prior to him transferring to Penn State, he was one of the top wide receiver transfer targets for most teams in the previous transfer portal cycle because he was a 1,400-yard plus receiver for 2 years at Kent State, which G5. But when he was at Kent State, his wide receivers coach was Matthew Middleton. And guess who K-State's wide receivers coach is? It's Matthew Middleton. So we're getting a guy who's reuniting with his wide receivers coach from a place where he had 1,400 plus yards for 2 consecutive seasons. He's coming back into that. He's got a quarterback with a phenomenal arm in Avery Johnson. So I think it's going to work out pretty well. It's a guy wide receiver wise. We haven't had a transfer like that who has that track record probably since Chris Harper. And Chris Harper, I don't even know how many yards he put up when he was at Oregon prior to transferring into K-State, but he was a huge target out of high school from Wichita, Kansas. But yeah, I'm stoked for Cephas. I think worst case scenario, he puts up 500 yards and it's a wash. Best case scenario, if he reaches his ceiling he had at Kent State, the sky's the limit for him. He could put up 1,400, 1,500 yards depending on how things go.
Yeah, whenever a guy transfers in, I guess the only thing you would not want him to do is just be a head case in the locker room. But we're not dealing with we're not dealing with like the pro level guys where it's like, all right, well, this takes money out of someone else's hands or a trade that's bad or whatever. The only thing that happens is that you lose guys to the transfer portal, or you gain guys who just completely wreck the team spiritually or mentally or whatever. But
well, we take at least one or two of those head cases every year, and usually you see them leave the following year, right? So like there was we were in need of a linebacker. It was a 5-star. He was a 5-star linebacker that came in, and he was just an absolute head case. Then the next year we took Goldie Lawrence, who it was between us and FSU when he committed, and he was vacillating. So he ended up going to FSU for a year, sat there, didn't play much. Excellent 4-star receiver out of Central Florida. He ended up coming to us. He lasted the spring practice, and basically Gus said, "Don't let the door hit you." I mean, this was a guy who he showed up late for the spring game. So let's just put it that way. Immensely talented receiver, but he's going to have to earn his way back up to the big time just because he didn't take it seriously. So, I think honestly for transfers, the thing that people need to understand is if these kids, UCF gets a lot of guys that, come back the second year that we recruited them. They're out of high school, but they didn't actually come to us, and then they come back to us. The hit rate on transfers is around 30% historically, right? So even though you're pulling in, like UCF's pulling in, 30 transfers, only 30% of those are actually going to be meaningful contributors. So it's with high school, that's around the same rate for high school players coming in as well. So take it with a grain of salt, because there's a lot of big name guys that come in that don't end up working out. We had an Ohio State linebacker that came in last year, a 5th-year guy, got some run at Ohio State, and then came to us, and he didn't even see the field. So there's we talk about transfers, but take it with a grain of salt.
Oh, we know that very, very well, because back when I was a student in 2011, we had Bryce Brown, who was a 5-star guy from Wichita East High School. He played for a year at Tennessee, I believe. And his brother Arthur had transferred him from Miami, who was another 5-star guy. He comes in, and I think he had 1 snap, 1 carry, and I think he got like -5 yards. And that was his stat line the entire time he was at K-State. He immediately declared for the draft. I don't think he made it. Maybe he had a cup of coffee on a practice squad in the NFL, but we know very well what it's like to bring in a big name guy and have him just never see the light of day.
We've had that happen quite often in basketball recently, but football, Gundy's famously said, until recently at least, I'm out on the portal. I'm out on NIL. And so he's had to change his tune quite often here, because last year, the start of it did not go real well. No. And then the year before that, it was transfer city out of Stillwater. So yeah, he's had to change his tune, but we've seen that really happen a lot in basketball. Isaiah Miranda's the number 1 guy where I could talk for 5 hours about him, where he transferred to Green Bay, where Doug Gottlieb's now the head coach at, former Oklahoma State guy. So it just is kind of bizarre. Yeah, right.
Ryan Davis is who I was thinking of, and he actually came from Georgia. So he was a big time prospect out of high school, and yeah, he got here, got a lot of hype. He had some run at Georgia, and then got here and just didn't even make the roster. So he transferred back out. But yeah, basketball is a whole nother thing. I mean, if we're going to talk hoops, I mean, you're basically year rentals at this point. You know what I mean? We've completely remade our basketball team again from last year. And Cal, you had to too, because everybody transferred out. I mean, you literally had, I think, 4 of your 5, or if not all 5 starters transfer out of the program?
Yeah, fortunately only 1, and Javon Small transferred within the conference. But the rest, I mean, we got Eric Daly Jr. heading west to UCLA. We got Brandon Garrison heading to Kentucky. I mean, it's just when guys transfer to those blue blood programs, I'm like, crap, you really knew you had somebody then, when they're able to transfer out, and they're transferring not to a just an even level.
But did you, Cal? You let UCF beat you last year. Did you really have someone?
I mean, it is funny when they put up the stats next to these guys' names. It's like Eric Taylor Jr. transfer, and then I'm sending it to my uncle who went to UCLA, and he's like, well, on the graphic, it says he averaged 9 points a game. So how good is he? And I'm like, well, let me explain. We needed him because we lost everyone. So it's a different comparison a little bit, right? I'm like, it'd been really nice to have him back. Now, I think we got some good transfers in. With that being said, I think we could wait maybe until a little bit closer to October, see how that all shakes out a little bit more here, because we got a transfer in last week from West Virginia. So shout out to the Ryan and Rush show whenever they are able to join here as well and talk a little bit more about the Javon Small for the other transfer we got in recently, who I can't remember his name off the top of my head. But with that being said, talking about transfer portals, talking about, guys leaving, coming and going, etc. I do want to talk about the death of the Pac-12 a little bit as well here too. Do you guys have any favorite memories of the Pac-12? I mean, I know we're all Big 12 fans. I mean,
that's my favorite memory. They died.
I don't think we're going to have favorite memories, but
Okay. So let's be frank. Okay. So the Pac-12, Rose Bowls, all that stuff. There's some historic games that were out there, and they were relevant for a really long time, and it sucks that we lost the Pac-12, because honestly, it's just a harbinger of things to come, right? And it's I've been talking about the TV providers starting to contract since 2016. I actually worked for a Disney company at the time and saw. Now, this wasn't released to everybody, but I could see what ESPN made and where they made their money. And there's a ceiling on that. And they didn't make it, literally at that time. They didn't make money until after the playoff. So basically, if they didn't have the playoff, they were operating in the red. So, there's only so much room where people keep wanting more money. You're going to have to contract the amount of inventory that you have. And so, for me, the Pac-12, this whole thing was, it was sad, because I think, yes, the Pac-12 was on the chopping block, and I'm glad it wasn't the Big 12. Yes, I think long-term, the ACC's on the chopping block, and it will be the Big Three, or Power 2 plus 1, whatever you want to call it these days. Right. But at the end of the day, I think, I think it's sad to see a power conference with that much history go away. I'll just put it that way. And I think, when it comes to UCF has not been in a regional conference ever. So we're used to traveling across the country and, coast to coast and all of that stuff. I mean, last year we racked up the most miles in all of college football. So, I hope Terry Mohajir, our AD, gets some benefit out of that and takes a trip to Hawaii or something. But at the end of the day, for the Pac-12, I hate to see it break up, but at the same time, I'm glad to see it break up, because that means it wasn't us. And there was a long time where there was a lot of back and forth to say, okay, with these dueling contracts, who's going to be the beneficiary of it? Our commissioner stepped up and said, hey, we'll take that 34, $35 million deal. And Pac-12 was left outside.
Yeah, the one thing I remember about the Pac-12 is when they moved their headquarters to San Francisco, and I had to look it up a little bit, and this was 2013. And I went, okay, why? But why move it to San Francisco? I mean, granted, Big 12's headquarters, for all intents and purposes, it's in Frisco, Texas, from what I understand and remember. But it's not, all right, we're going to lease a big office space in a huge high rise in a very prominent city. You would think that'd be to get a lot of TV deals done. Hey, we want to be next door to NBC, ABC, whatever it may be, but that's just not really.
Then you go to Burbank, dude. It's not San Francisco. That's seriously, I've been to Burbank. I said, I used to work for Disney. That's where the executives are, right? They're not in San Francisco.
Yeah, exactly. It was just a dumb move overall. It just didn't make sense at the time.
And that's Larry Scott.
Yeah, I mean, that's just Larry Scott trying to wheel and deal and go, hey, you know what? I'd rather live in San Francisco versus, wherever else, right? And now he's a year ago, almost, not to the day or anything, but a year ago, the Pac-12 said, hey, you know what? We're out. I mean, actually in January of 2023 to be exact, they said, you know what? We're going to move out of San Francisco, move to the East Bay, and stuff like that. And it's like, okay, well, why? Why did you decide to move out? Did it not work? And that was just I think the nail in the coffin, at least the first nail, was put in 2013 when they decided to move. I
think the first nail in the
needed.
I think the first nail in the coffin was the fact that they decided not to partner with a TV distribution network, right? So they were hanging their hat on DirecTV. That didn't work out. They, if you look at the Big Ten's network, if you look at the SEC network, that was all done with a large distribution channel with Fox and ESPN, right? With, they had a stake in each one. The ACC's the same way. ESPN's invested in the ACC network, right? The Pac-12, they were the originators of the network idea. They just executed it poorly. Had they partnered with someone like that to get their distribution up, Pac-12 might still exist today, and they might be making a heck of a lot more money than the Big 12. That was, I think, their downfall. And it's a collective arrogance. I mean, you saw what happened when Arizona and Arizona State and everybody was, coming out this way. When that all went down, that 7:00 meeting in the morning where they said, hey, we're going, right? They were fighting tooth and nail. Or Utah fans, their thought process. People forget in Utah, as much as they've done, and they were really good in the Mountain West Conference, but they were in the Mountain West Conference, 10, 15 years ago? It wasn't that long ago that they were a G5 program, right? So yes, you've got Cam Rising. Yes, you've got a good program. It's a solid football program. Yes, I'm excited about getting Utah out of the Pac schools that we got. I think that was the one that I was most excited about from a quality standpoint of a program. But at the same time, there's a collective arrogance that has permeated that conference for a really, really long time. And that ultimately, as much as we made fun of, who was their commissioner, Kliavkoff. Yeah. Right. So as much as we made fun of Kliavkoff, like with his pronouncements, a lot of that was coming from the president's, not playing ball with what he was bringing to the table. And he was kind of in a rock and a hard place, right? It's kind of like we used to call him Baghdad Bob. You know what I mean? So it's like, if you've got a group of people that are saying, hey, we're worth this much and we don't want to take a step back in the relevance or, not even relevance, but, premier branding of our conference as premier schools, you end up with what you got. And, I'll say, I think the loss of regionality is tough. I think it's tough for fans. I think it's tough for, programs. It's added cost. There's a lot of things that go along with that. And I hate to see that for college football collectively, and specifically for the Pac-12. But at the same time, it needed to be put out of its misery.
Yeah. And I think the first nail in the coffin was hiring Larry Scott, because he inherited a great situation where you had a perennial powerhouse in USC. I mean, he was coming off of the tails of the Matt Leinart, Reggie Bush era, 3 years after they had all left USC. And at that point in time, I mean, if you look back at articles from 2009, 2010, the Pac-12 was one of the most powerful conferences in all of collegiate athletics, because they had prowess. They had this prestige about them. And I think that did inform a lot of the arrogance that you mentioned, Roger. But at the same time, when they had an opportunity the first time to expand, Colorado took the bait, and then they added Utah, but no one else took the bait. Texas didn't take the bait. Okie State didn't take the bait.
They were going to take the bait.
They were going to, but then they last second decided not to, and they held everything together. And I'm glad, because as a K-State fan, K-State and KU were probably going to be left out of that picture. Iowa State was most definitely going to be left out of that picture of whatever that would have turned into with a Pac-16. But CU left. They're gone. You mentioned the Pac-12 network not being available. They didn't have a media partner. I live in Denver, Colorado, and it's impossible. It was, prior to the Pac-12 demise, it was impossible to get the Pac-12 network unless you had one specific TV provider. So you're living in the territory, in the region that you're operating in, and you can't even access the network that's servicing one of the two major schools in your region. That's kind of bizarre, kind of fumbling the bag, like to use that terminology. And Kliavkoff, to your point, the presidents weren't buying what he was selling, but I think a lot of that is he just inherited a horrible situation from a horrible leader who made horrible decisions over the course of 14 years 14 years since he had been in charge, but I guess 12 years that he was the commissioner of the Pac-12, Larry Scott. So Kliavkoff, he seemed like kind of a snake oil salesman to a degree, but you have to sell snake oil if that's all you have. Like there's nothing for him to sell at that point.
Well, it's what, you talk about distribution, 12 million. That was the Pac-12's distribution. 12 million. That's it. 12 million households, right? UCF and the Orlando Metro is 2.7 million alone. And you're talking about schools that are in Southern California, you know what I mean? That the LA market, all of those markets, you had UCLA, you had USC, you had all those. Like, there's no way that the distribution should have been only 12 million. You can't monetize something you don't have access to.
Oh, I've got several family members who are all West Coast, big UCLA fans, UCLA graduates. My mom went to Colorado, and the challenges of trying to follow the Pac-12 network and trying to get access to it, and having my grandfather, who is now 94, who needs a lot of help with the TV. But at the time, when the Pac-12 network was going on or whatever, we're talking where he's watching everything on TV. He's going to be one of the core demographics you're catering to, UCLA donor, etc. And he's going, so I have to buy DirecTV now? What's going on? And I have to do this. And then and then you've got, a grandson who's going, I can't even get this thing streaming on my phone either to, try to airplay it. Like there was just no way either way to make it work really just easily.
And it was harder than getting away games on the Longhorn Network, which was a battle in and of itself. But when you had
which is the reason they didn't split. That's the reason they didn't split to go to the Pac-12 to begin with, was the Longhorn Network.
Exactly.
And that's also the reason why we lost a lot of schools out of the Big 12 was the Longhorn Network.
It's amazing how that kept things together while also
tearing it apart,
pushing A&M out, but also and now they're giving it all up after all of that. They're now finally giving it up, which is just amazing to me.
I know money rules all, but UCLA would not be moving to the Big Ten unless it was money, right? We all know that. Yeah. But also UCLA, when I'm asking family members who are just like, who I assume will be honest with me, at least is why I give the anecdote, and they're going, I don't know how this is going to work out, because UCLA football in the Rose Bowl, it's going to be an away game for so many fans. You're talking about how many fans are Ohio State, Michigan, even some Rutgers, I would assume. Just whoever who goes, we could go actually maybe see our team beat UCLA. And I'm talking about, the Rutgers of the world here. Michigan and Ohio State should be. But, you're talking about, Nebraska going, well, hey, let's go out west in the middle, in October, November, and December and enjoy the, beautiful, beautiful weather. Now, what they're also going to understand is that Pasadena, California is not that close to the coast whatsoever. And you're not really staying on the beach when you're going to a game in the Rose Bowl. But regardless, it's just UCLA. I don't know how they're going to do in football. They're totally upside down, and they're not in a great position to actually move. Chip Kelly did not give them a great position anyway, so he left way too late in the kind of cycle there. But regardless, it just is that the Pac-12 set itself up to, like you said, Bob, to be selling only snake oil. And then at the end of the day, when that's the only product you've got, it's just going to be bad overall for your whole conference. And I do remember hearing last year going, okay, or a couple of years ago, excuse me, okay, Texas and OU are leaving. So then what's all of a sudden going to happen with the Big 12? And if you had told me then, hey, this is what the Big 12 will look like, there's no way I would have believed you. No way. No way. You had more teams and also added in teams from the Pac-12, just with all due respect. I thought, hey, you know what? Maybe we will add in, no offense, but I thought we will add in the group, a couple group of 5 teams. We'll add in Cincinnati. We'll add in UCF. We'll add in, teams that make more sense for region, Houston, etc. But if you had also said, then we're going to add in Utah, Arizona State, Colorado, I probably would have believed, honestly, at the time, because we see how they've been doing in football and basketball. But adding in 3 Pac-12 schools who are just prominent, at least in one sport. Arizona State's bringing it all up in baseball, but
Let's be real though, Cal. The latent 8 is what I like to call them, not of the leftover 8. Right? When we were looking at whether this move was going to happen for UCF, that group of schools, every single one of them, and they should have, right, started reaching out to the Pac-12, and Oklahoma State was one of them, right?
Oh yeah.
That reached out and said, hey, and a lot of fans were out there like, oh, we can't keep this together. If we bring these other schools in, we're going to drop a tier and all this stuff. We need to join the pack and all this other stuff that was going on, right? Bob Bowlesby stood in front of the Texas legislature or whatever and said, hey, you can't let Texas leave because we're only going to make $15 million a year per school for the rest of the schools if you allow this to happen, right? Now, obviously, I think we all expected that was a gross undervaluation, right? But that was the narrative at the time. And it's how can you compete with 15 to 18 million? UCF was making $9 million in the AAC towards the end of its tenure before it left. You're only talking 5 or 6 million more. And can you imagine now with the salary, what's going on now with the players and revenue sharing, where you can go up to 22 million if you're only making 15, and that's a certain percentage of your revenue, your media revenue that you can do that with. You're not going to be able to compete. So I think Bob Bowlesby did a great job of not doing what the Pac did, which is he went out and immediately went and got schools to bolster it, right? 2, he knew when to step aside and let somebody else take the bull by the horns. And to the Big 12 president's, benefit, the other thing that they did that was really, really smart and said, we can't be traditional college football anymore. We are not going to be able to win at that game. So they said they took their hands off the wheel, hired somebody that was a business savvy person who was familiar with media and brought them in and said, go lead. And they let him lead. That's the important part. They didn't sit on their hands. And I think what the Pac-12 did was it relied too heavily on the thinking of college football's past. And you saw those schools leave because it was no longer advantageous to be part of the pack anymore, or else they would get left behind. So I think the combination of Bob Bowlesby's decision to bring people in quickly, at which as much as the 2016 dog and pony show peeved a lot of UCF fans off, I think it was an advantage because when the opportunity did come up, Navigate had already done all the work on everybody. They knew what they needed to do if they needed to fill that backfill, and they picked the schools up very quickly, a lot more quickly than what this traditionally happens. I think that was to their benefit.
Well, yeah, no one at the end of the day wants to be the last person there, waiting to dance with somebody, right? Everyone wants to be part of the conference. Oklahoma State was going to reach out to the Pac-12 immediately and go, so what are you guys doing? As another prominent conference, we weren't going to reach out to the ACC. They're over the rainbow, as so to speak. They're over SEC country. We'd have to go through. Now, I know West Virginia is there to tie us in, but we were going to do whatever. And I, from my understanding, K-State and everyone else would have been like, hey, what's going on? And as recently as this year, we've heard KU to the SEC or to the Big Ten just because of their basketball program alone. Well, and just to their basketball program alone. But I remember hearing, oh, what if Oklahoma State, when OU and Texas announced they're leaving, oh, would Oklahoma State join the Big Ten? And the whole deal was, no, they don't have the good enough academics. Don't have good enough academics. And I still am laughing at that at the end of the day because, okay, SMU, they're joining the ACC. You've got Cal and Stanford.
They're not joining. They're buying their way into the ACC.
Whatever the right wording is, I agree.
Zero money. So they spent $200 million plus. We talk about, FSU and the whole going to get PE money or whatever to help them get their buyout. Basically, SMU said, hey, folks, this is what we need to do. We need to take no money. And I don't know if you actually saw their video where they were talking about joining the ACC because they're joining now because of the athletic year. Look at the background pictures of the stadium. There is literally nobody there. SMU has a core group of very, very wealthy people that have funded this entire thing, and the ACC needs the money. That's
so they've got the same football culture that Cal has, or that Stanford has. I've been to a game at Stanford.
Yeah, the Cal's in the red. The Cal's in the red. Like, they can't even afford their stadium.
Red. OU's in red. OU's about to go bankrupt. It's the funniest thing in the world. They are not able to pay, their head coach in Venables all the money he's due when he's due every single paycheck. And that comes out in like the Oklahoman, but doesn't somehow make national news. It comes out in the Oklahoma newspaper. But of course, it's going to get swept under and not talked about that much. So, I mean, every school's dealing with financial issues. I'm not saying Oklahoma State's above this whatsoever. I know there was a whole deal. Oklahoma State announced a whole enlargement of the campus, of athletic facilities, all this type of stuff. And then all of a sudden, NIL got real. And everyone went, okay. And then no one said a word about the Oklahoma State Health and Wellness Center being built next to the football practice facility, et cetera. So I'm not saying we're immune to this either. I do want to give context. But at the same point, UCLA versus Hawaii in August 31st in 2021. I went to that game and I was given the tickets for free, of course. And I was given the parking because it was free. And I mean, we're dealing with this whole juxtaposition here, as you're saying, Roger, of SMU has a great base of people who really want the football program to succeed and really want to come back. But at the same point, they are not dealing with a big group of people. I mean, it's a very tight knit, but a big donor area of SMU, of Southern Methodist University, and a prominent area in Dallas. I mean, I'm not telling anyone anything they don't know.
And they created NIL, if anybody's ever watched Pony XS.
No, they got caught. They didn't create it. They got caught, right? Because I tell you this right now, the SEC schools have been doing that just as long.
Oh, yeah.
But
James just got caught up in the middle of it.
Yeah. And it's interesting, Cal, that's the other thing about all this, because now you've got this revenue sharing that's going to be dipping into bottom lines as well, right? So that's one area where I think UCF has an advantage. And I'm just, again, black and gold banner in the background here, right? We've had to do more with less for so long that we had to be really fiscally responsible. You heard UNC's chancellor come out, it was a couple months ago. He came out and said, we've got to do something about revenue because we're going to be in the red with this revenue sharing that's coming out right now. There's going to be a lot of ADs, a lot of chancellors and presidents across the country that are rethinking, their investment in athletics. And the question is, it used to be, it was the front door to the university. I mean, the Miami Herald, now, again, I'm not going to give any, credence to this, right? But the Miami Herald, Miami's main, newspaper, came out, I think it was last week or the week before last, and said, does Miami need to drop divisions from a power conference, because Miami's whole reason for investing so much money in the 80s and all the cocaine that went along with it, Cocaine Willie, that was all because they needed to up their attendance, because they're a small private school. They've only got 15,000 students between grad and undergrad now, right? Even now. And it was smaller then. And they needed that to boost the attendance so they could reinvest and become who Miami is academically now. Well, they can support themselves with the students that they have now. Now there's questions in the city of Miami and in their main newspaper. Is it worth the investment? And I think schools like Stanford, who said they aren't going to pay players as soon as this comes out, they're now joining the ACC. What are they going to do? Because they've frankly came out and said, we will not pay players. And if we have to pay players, we'll drop. Right. So that mission versus the revenue generation of the athletic departments and what those budgets look like is going to be really interesting. Now, Stanford can afford it. I mean, their endowment is ridiculous, right? They can afford it. But what benefit does an academic minded institution, right? Which is why I'm glad Stanford's not in the Big 12. An academic minded institution like that culture, what does that mean for college football moving forward?
I think it's a really interesting just idea, because what levels are we going to see? Are we going to see tiers at the end of the day where, and Roger, I know you and I have talked about this, and Bob, we have to as well too, are we going to see tiers of football teams, tiers of basketball teams, tiers of baseball, etc., where all of a sudden you've got 40 football teams that are qualified that could make it to the, for example, 10 spots, in the playoff, and there's other 4 that the other 100 teams are fighting for example, right? Are we going to see all of this break it down at the end of the day where it's just a bunch of basically, I don't want to say baloney, but where it's not just the SEC, it's the SEC all of a sudden looks like it's closer to 30-ish teams combined with a couple others here and there. And that's how it all fizzles out, because you do have the Stanford and Cals of the world who are just going, hey, we're not doing anything in football. Like we will win a swimming and diving championship 3,000 times over, and also some other sports here as well too that I can't name off the top of my head, before we're going to compete in football, and be relevant again anytime soon.
Well, I can tell you this too. I mean, there's going to be a lot of questions as I think for the Big 12 as a whole, and I'll say this for UCF. UCF has got to make itself the pretty girl at the ball here pretty soon, right? Because over the next 8 to 10 years, I think there's going to be a lot more consolidation. If the ACC goes away, then I think the Big 12 will. You mentioned Kansas. I think Kansas would be a benefactor of that, moving to the Big 10. That's really where they would be looking, right? I don't think the SEC wants Kansas. The SEC thinks differently. They have a certain. They're not going to be the Big 10 and add Rutgers, right? For the distribution dollars. It's a different way of thinking about college football in the Southeast. Living here, I can tell you that. That premium branding and that premium college football, they are now taking less money than what the Big 10 is now to maintain that premium feel for college football, right? So Kansas is not going to the SEC. I just don't see it. If they're going anywhere, they would go to the Big 10. But UCF right now, and what UCF fans are thinking about right now is what happens 8 years from now, right? And 8 years from now, 8 to 10 years from now, I think is when that wave starts to crash over the Big 12. And it'll be interesting to see whether the SEC and the Big 10 over the next 3 to 5 years, how many more they absorb, because we've kind of put this 20 team like level on ourselves where we've said, okay, you can't really go over 20 teams. They absolutely can. And if they continue to do that, where do you stack up in the Big 12? So that's what UCF fans are thinking about already. I think a lot of power conference fans that have been in power conferences for a long time and specific conferences for a long time don't think that way because they've never had to. But realistically speaking, that's where we're at. And what's that final number? So I do think you see tiers. I think that, they're already pushing, the latest thing was they were pushing an expansion of the basketball tournament, right? That's not so we can add more Loyola. I can't even say it. Loyola Marimounts or whatever, right? That's so that more of those P5 conferences get more of their teams guaranteed in the conference and tournament and pull shares of that revenue that's, right now managed by the NCAA. That's the only reason that's happening. It's so that more Power 5 teams have more inclusion. And, it'll be really, really interesting to see because they're going to do it. They're going to do it in football again, I think. And their argument's going to be, hey, we have schools that people want to watch and that are more competitive in the SEC and Big 10. So we want you to expand it and we get a higher percentage of that. Same way with basketball with the Big 12. The Big 12 has been the top basketball conference for a while now. I can tell you this, when we were in the AAC, if we were 8-8 in conference, we weren't making the tournament. But in the Big 12, and that's why it made basketball so much fun this year for UCF fans, which it hasn't been for a long time, is because you can still, your season is not lost if you lose one game. And, I just don't think Power 5 conference members realize that that's where this is going because they're going to try to consolidate more income. Because guess what? There's no more income to be had from Fox or ESPN or anywhere else for those increases. So that's where it's coming from. So I do see tiers, and thank goodness that the Big 12 is included in the tier that's still going to make decisions in this new autonomy conference level that they've been talking about in the last couple of weeks. that's going to be coming out. And Charlie Baker, the NCAA president, has been championing since he got the job. So I think we're good now. I think the Big 12 is positioned well. The ACC schools have to worry. I think we have to worry after that. So we need to do everything that we can to win as much as we can within the playoff to show that, hey, the schools that are here are as good as we all know they are, because I've watched the football, right? And that we can demonstrate that to continue that inclusion going forward.
Yeah, at the end of the day, just to sum up what you said, maybe in 2 words, cheers to Brett Yormark. I mean, that's 4 words, but still, at the end of the day, I mean, that's the thing that I take away, though.
2 words and a name. Let's put it that way.
Well, fair enough. Yeah, I corrected myself too. So I was trying to be right, but either way, there's the difference in how the commissioners of the conference ran it when everything started breaking down. When Texas OU didn't give OSU fans heads up, and of course, every Oklahoma State fan is going to let them know. You didn't let us know, and you want to leave. Now you want to play us later on. Well, it'll happen. It'll happen. But with that being said, it's one of those where I'm happy Brett Yormark and Bob Bowlesby or /Trollsby, whatever we want to say today, is out there helping us, be in a better position where we are now. With that being said, though, I come on in out the podcast here talking about the All-American polls that came out. So Phil Steele's, I mean, it's at the end of the day, it's we could talk about college football 25 rankings of top 25 or the stadiums that were the loudest or offenses or defenses, whatever. But I always figure that we could talk about that another day too. But Phil Steele put out recently here, basically the preseason All-Americans Big 12 selection and his all Big 12's kind of All-American selections, excuse me. And the one thing I noticed is that, yes, I would put Avery Johnson at quarterback somewhere, on one of the lists, maybe not first team, just because we haven't seen him be the starter or whatever. But, him and Cam Rising would be the kind of prolific players for K-State and Utah, respectively, that I'd go, okay, those would be the guys to make it if there were guys. But, Bob, I'll ask you here first. What other K-State players should we know about who you think are under the radar and maybe should have been at least a little bit more in the conversation to make, we're talking about the whole country All-Americans here, not just Big 12, but I'm taking the Big 12 guys out of that list.
Yeah. I mean, looking at the list, I think it makes sense to me why K-State and maybe Utah were not included, just because we're not returning a ton of our offensive production starter wise on the offensive side or really the defensive side. The defensive side, probably the best guy that we're returning is Jacob Parrish or Desmond Purnell. We've got a couple of guys that we're returning, but we lost guys like Khalid Duke. We lost guys across the board on the offense and the defensive side of the ball. So I'm not surprised to not see any of those names on this list, because so much of that is dependent on what did you do last year and what do you think, how do you think that's going to translate to this next season? Unless your name is Jalen Daniels and you got hurt and then you were the preseason quarterback last year. So when I'm looking at the All-American list, guys that I think maybe could have made the cut that didn't make the cut, honestly, probably the only name that really comes to mind for me would be a DJ Giddens, but he's also in a conference where the guys that you're behind are Brooks from Texas Tech, Ollie Gordon. So you're not even the best running back in your own conference, let alone when you look at the national picture. But all of that is to say, he's behind, and I mean, he's ahead of McMillan from Arizona when you look at all-purpose yards. So he had 1,500 plus all-purpose yards last season. So when you look at the kind of the full portfolio of what DJ Giddens brings to the table, I think he's probably the most well-rounded athlete that was maybe left off the list from a K-State perspective. And then you could make an argument for like an Austin Moore or Jacob Parrish on the defensive side of the ball, but it is what it is. I'm not super surprised to not see those guys on this list. And I think we'll be revisiting this, and I would be happy to join up again back in, December, January next year when we have the post, the after the season list, because I think it's going to look significantly different. If K-State's going to have the season that I think most K-State fans think we're going to have this year.
Well, I'd also just, Roger, before I throw it to you, I'd also say I think that's one of the things that K-State and Utah are really good at, is just having, you might have a guy who's rated 88 as your best running back, but then literally the next running back is rated to 87, and then the third string strength like 81, Whereas you've got Oklahoma State maybe with, a 93 first running back and Ollie Gordon. And then, you're talking like, okay, then it's 81 at running back 2, right? And I think that's one of the things here that we saw last year with, for example, with Oklahoma State, of course, just to keep going back to it, where wide receivers, it was, all right, we've got really good wide receivers overall, and then there's just a drop. And then there's a huge drop at the end of the day, too. So you have guys who up and down the list are always going to be just guys who could just replace the other guy in Utah and K-State just right there. I mean, the athletic training, all type of stuff is just known. I mean, it's kind of the same model, I would say, of you got 3- and 4-star guys who are 5 stars by the time they leave.
Yeah, I think for me, when it comes to K-State and having watched you guys play last year versus us, I think the biggest thing, and that was our first big splash as far as the importance. Everybody knows that the lines, the games are won in the trenches. And one thing that K-State is known for and has been known for a long time is developing offensive linemen. And, they'll take those 3-star big frame guys and turn them into consistent starters and then have enough of a pipeline to be able to rotate them. You guys rotate a lot of linemen because you have that depth. And so that bodes well for the future, because then the next season, you've got those guys that you were rotating in that have got snaps and they've had time to develop in who they're going to be. And that wins football games. Let's be frank. Back to your original question, Cal, for UCF, I think the one big miss in a crowded room, I think, for this list would probably be RJ Harvey. He has gotten a lot of play as far as dark horse consideration for Heisman. People were talking about him early in the season. All of this other stuff. The guy last year, 226 carries, 1,400 yards, 6.3 average. He was 6.7 average the previous season. He's just a dynamic back, and he kind of ran out of gas towards the end of the last season because we were leaning on him so heavily and we didn't really have a good backup for him, but we've solved that problem this year. He's been a really, really good back, believe it or not, converted quarterback. He transferred to us when we're talking about transfers from Virginia. He was, his freshman year, he was a quarterback commit, to Virginia and transferred back to us. But I think that's that guy is the one guy I think on our list and on our roster that is a potential. Kobe Hudson split. He was still 1,000-yard receiver. But he split that with Jawad Baker, who was also a 1,000-yard receiver who went to the NFL last year and was drafted. I think he has the opportunity to have a breakout, but he hasn't proved it yet. And with our roster turnover, KJ Jefferson had a bad year by his standards due to the injuries and everything else. So I don't think he would be in the running for first team, although maybe second team as well. But that's really what I would think. We've got some other big time players that transferred in that I think are going to make some noise. One from Miami, a defensive end from Miami that was a borderline 5-star commit and did really, really well at Miami last year. But I kind of agree with the list, even though they left a bunch of people off of UCF. And obviously we've got Ollie Gordon to contend with in the league, who's one of the best backs in the country. But I think, RJ Harvey would be my pick of people that should have or could have at least made second or third team on the list and didn't. And I just don't understand that. It's unfathomable to me. Anybody who's watched him play football.
Well, so from what you're saying, though, I mean, the other Big 12 running back here that is on the list, his fourth team, and that's, besides Oklahoma State's Ollie Gordon, is Devin Neal, running back out of Kansas. So you just flat out say, no matter what, RJ Harvey over Devin Neal, just to kind of compare conference, guys back and forth.
Yeah, absolutely. And, even for within the conference, I was surprised that we didn't have anybody, although I was surprised, but I wasn't, because we had a lot of turnover for offensive pieces last year and skill players, but we've got a lot of really good skill players coming back. So, and I think KJ probably would have been higher on that list too if he didn't have the season at Arkansas that he did, but who knows if he'd be playing for us. I mean, that's the guy who's the leading, he leads almost every category for Arkansas in history as a quarterback. So, he's a pretty big name player, but he was injured last year and had a terrible offensive line. So I'm excited to see what he does for us.
Yeah, me too. Well, with that being said here, I do want to go ahead and just wrap up the podcast here for tonight's episode of the Big 12 Huddle. As always, you can find at the CGA Tour for our Oklahoma State podcast news and notes from the College Huddle. Bob, where can everyone find you more?
I am at Bob Trollsby on Twitter, and I host the Cocaine Willie podcast. That's at Cocaine Willie on Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all the things. We usually go on Tuesdays, so whenever you're seeing this, if it's a Tuesday or a Wednesday, catch the pod the next day. We're going to be doing a retro replay. So we're going to be rewatching the 2011 K-State versus Baylor football game against RG3. We're going to be doing that on Tuesday, July 2nd at 7:45 Central Time. So if you're going to be around, watch it. If not, catch it the next day.
Awesome. And Roger, of course, where can everyone find the Knighted Ones?
So the Knighted Ones, you can find me at Night Bangle, or you can find the Knighted Ones at the Knighted Ones on X, Twitter, whatever you want to call it. You can also find us on Instagram. You can find us on YouTube at the Knighted Ones. And, I think I might join Bob for Tipsy Tuesdays he's got going on over there. I don't know.
That sounds like
you're welcome to join.
That's something that we all should be joining here. The whole Big 12 huddle should just be joining every time. But with that being said, thank you guys so much for joining here again. Thanks so much, listeners, for following here. Please follow, subscribe, share everything you can about the College Huddle, and we'll catch you guys again soon.